but I want to welcome you all on this lovely last week before the holidays in December to this event, Fireside Chat, with Dr. Monica Parrish Trent, who we'll hear speak in a few moments. But this is Mentor Collective's Access Through Innovation series, our fourth now, where we find inspiring leaders across higher education to talk about their personal journey, their mission, and the organizations they represent. So today we're going to be talking about holistic student success for community and technical colleges, and we're really grateful to have you here with us. Very briefly, so I'm Jackson Boyar, co-founder and CEO of Mentor Collective. This is nothing to do with Mentor Collective today. We really see these events as a contribution as citizens in higher education. But briefly about us, we're a network of institutions, much like Achieving the Dream, focused on student success. We do so by supporting large-scale peer-to-peer mentoring programs that improve student outcomes, student retention, belonging, and ultimately close equity gaps. And we're very thrilled to work with over 20 community colleges and technical colleges. Many of those are members of Achieving the Dream. We attend the conference and we'll be there again next year, so very much looking forward to that. But thank you to some of our members who I know are part of this conversation as well today. So with that said, our last slide here is the introduction to the woman herself, Dr. Monica Parrish Trent. She has 25 years of experience across higher education in a variety of roles, starting as a practitioner and then leader on campuses, perhaps most notably at Delaware County Community College. She served as the provost. That diversity of experience, I know, has been really critical to her work at Achieving the Dream, where she is the chief program officer. And in that capacity, maybe the most important aspect of her work is the Dream event, which is really a space for learning and progress across the network at Achieving the Dream. So much to share with us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll give Monica a chance just to say hello. Maybe there's something you want to add to that introduction. There's so much more that I could say, but we're so grateful to have you here today, Monica.
Thank you for being here, everyone. It's so nice to see so many folks coming out today just before the winter break, and to also see so many Achieving the Dream colleges. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'll turn it back to you, Jackson.
Well, thank you, Monica. So I'm going to jump right into the question we start all of these events with, which is really about you personally, Monica, and your North Star in your work. We know it is not an easy time to be a leader in higher education. You now represent over 300 community colleges across the country. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what brought you into the role you're in today, and the North Star that drives your work.
Thanks, Jackson. So I think telling you a little bit about me will frame what's my North Star, and I would say that is my family and my history. I was raised by a single mother. My mom got pregnant with me in high school, and so she wasn't able to go to high school physically for the rest of her senior year, and stayed at home with her parents. And I knew that going to college was something that my mother, my grandmother, and my grandfather really wanted for me. It was something that they talked about all the time. It was something that my mother tried her entire life. She was in and out of college trying to pursue an education. And so I knew that I was going to go to college, but as a first gen, there was no roadmap. So I went to college and I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do. And I remember thinking, oh, I want to be Connie Chung. I loved, the news. And I thought, this is interesting. You can have these fascinating conversations with people and you can talk about issues and you can understand the human condition. And then I started taking the communication studies classes, and they were very technical and not particularly engaging. And I had an English course where our book that I remember the most was The Bluest Eye. And it had a profound effect on me in terms of really understanding what it's like to to critically think about life and society and people and race and positionality and opportunity and lack of opportunity. And so I switched to being an English major without a plan. I just love books. And I got my degree in English, and I did what many English majors probably did at that time in the early 90s, which is really thought about law school or something else. And so I waited tables, and I eventually came back within a year to get my master's degree in English. Again, still loved literature and writing. And there was someone that was part of one of my classes that said, you know, you've got 18 credits in English. You can teach at the community college. And I went, really? And she's like, and you can get paid for it. And so I taught my very first class as an adjunct while I was finishing up my graduate courses, and I absolutely loved it. It was at Northern Virginia Community College, and I was like, ooh, I bumped into a career here. And my North Star, I guess I would say, came full circle, because I was raised to really understand and value something that the rest of my family didn't have, which was a college education. But I didn't know what to do once I got to campus. I knew to go and to take my classes and to pass my classes, but I didn't know how to make that connection from being a student into a career until I had that opportunity to teach the community college class. And so I would say my North Star has been my family, my history, but really education and the value of education and understanding that it changes the trajectory of people's lives.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that personal context. I know it no doubt is driving you in all that you do today, but I know the fortitude, the persistence and tenacity that comes from being a first-gen college student, standing on the shoulders of your family, it means a lot to the work you do today. And I think that really segues nicely into the second question, which is another framing question. Student success is at the core of achieving the dream's mission. But to you as a leader at achieving the dream, what does student success mean to you, and how is it shaped by your personal experience and also your professional experience?
Thank you. So, you know, I'll go back to that personal story. I think for a really long time, student success meant access. As long as you could document that there was access for folks to go to college, then you were successful. And so, you know, I started out at George Mason University in the 80s, and George Mason is a predominantly white institution, but there was a lot of effort by Virginia to reach into different communities and bring in Black students. And so one of the things that was a part of bringing us in was creating this community where we understood where to go and where to look for support. And so I can remember Mr. Smith, who was in charge of the Black Peer Counseling Office. He gave us Souls of Black Folks, the Negro National Anthem, and Up From Slavery. They came in a bundle. And he said, the next time I see you, you need to know all of the words to the Negro National Anthem. And you need to read these books before the year is over. And he told us where the Black Peer Counseling Office was. He told us where the church was and where the bus stop was to get to the church, so that we could create a sense of community, because at the time there were only 3% Black students at George Mason, and there were over 20,000 students. And so I didn't understand what a gift that was or what a strategy that was until recently, probably within the last 10 years. But it was looking at more than access. It was looking at success, because George Mason had opened the doors for us. But most of us were first gen. There were a few students whose parents had college educations, and we were from all over Virginia trying to figure it out. And so student success really means providing not just an opportunity to get an education because you've been able to register at a community college or admitted to another type of institution. It means understanding the students, their cultural wealth, their backgrounds, and ensuring that they're successful, and really thinking about what that wraparound support looks like. And so I would also say that things are different in 2024 than they were, you know, when I finished in 1991, in terms of a college education means you're going to get an opportunity for a job. You can be overeducated and underemployed, or overeducated and not employed. And so when I think about success today, it's more than access and completion, but it's important. You've got to get your degree. But if you have a degree and you don't have a job, especially a job with living, sustaining wages, we haven't done what we were supposed to do. We haven't fulfilled that promise. And so I think student success today really means ensuring that students have access to an education, that they are supported all the way through the journey, and that we don't assume that we're finished when they earn a degree or credential or transfer, right? Our work isn't really done until we ensure that they are in jobs that allow them to provide for themselves and their families. And so I think that that is the way that I would define student success. I would also say we have to remember who our students are. And so when I think about my mom, she was a parenting student. Many of our community college students, they are parents themselves, or they're taking care of their parents. They're poverty impacted. They're first generation, they're adult learners, they're managing so many things in their lives that wraparound support is critical. Someone needs to show them that they care and give them a roadmap.
So many follow-up questions that I'll try to stick to the script. I think it's fascinating how over the course of this term, student success and its evolution, we've seen the conversation start at access, move to transition and retention, move to graduation, and now that is not enough. It is social mobility more fundamentally. It's the generational wealth, it's the happiness, the opportunity that higher education affords. And I think it's wonderful to see leaders like yourself thinking not just about what happens within the boundaries of the degree or the credential, but also before and after. And I think that speaks to the dialogue around higher education we're experiencing, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I want to talk now about the learning events that you're a part of facilitating at Dream. So many of your members are encountering different challenges across the nation, and these events in many ways are an opportunity to facilitate learning for your members, but hosting events is also a way to facilitate learning and innovation at an individual campus level. In some cases, we have leaders of systems here listening in. So tell us a little bit about how you think about designing these events and using them as a catalyst for change and innovation.
Sure, great question. As we get ready for Dream, so one of the things that I think about in terms of learning events is just like students learn in a classroom, they also learn from conversations with their peers, they learn from observation, they learn from what they read, they learn from the context that's around a particular subject. And so when we're planning events at Dream, or for our Data and Analytics Summit, or our Teaching and Learning Institute, or our Equity Institute, we're really thinking about who's our audience and what's our purpose. And it's something that I talk to my team a lot about. Who do we intend to come here, and what is it that we really think will be most useful for them? What are issues that are most pressing? And so we try to create opportunities around those most pressing issues that allow the attendees to learn from a plenary session, from a concurrent session, but also from networking breakfasts, receptions, and really conversations in the corner with colleges that we might have set up with other partners, or with colleges that are facing the same kind of challenges or the same kinds of opportunities. And so peer learning is foundational to the work that we do. We also want to make sure that with our events that we are curating high impact practices, and that our colleges are sharing examples and data. Because many people come to these conferences and these convenings to learn something. There's something they need to bring back, right? And so I think about it when I was a faculty member and I would ask, I want to go to this conference, and I'd have to tell my dean, well, what are you going to learn? What are you going to bring back, right? How are we going to know that this is a good investment? That still informs the way that we design our events at Achieving the Dream. What is it that attendees are going to take back to campus, or to their offices, or to their conversations, that's going to inform the way that they are supporting students? And very similar to institutions that had to come through the pandemic, nonprofits had to come through the pandemic too, in thinking about events. And so we had to think about, what are some creative ways to host an event virtually? And how do you use the virtual community, to set up community and to foster peer learning, right? And so those quick courses on how to use a breakout room in Zoom, those things really matter to us because they were opportunities to create peer learning. But it also showed us that we could reach larger audiences. And so we've had peer learning virtual events that have had 600, 700, and 800 people attend, show up, and had to think of ways to make that meaningful and make sure that we give them opportunities to share data and high impact practices and really connect with one another. And so the design and delivery of our learning events is really quite similar to what we design and deliver in the classroom, right? Opportunities for learners to engage in the material and different modalities and different dimensions with different levels of conversation. Sometimes it's leadership driven, sometimes it's student driven. And those student-driven learning opportunities sometimes are the most impactful because it's the students talking about the ways in which they experience our campuses or are experiencing the workforce that help inform and challenge us as practitioners and leaders and researchers to dig deeper, but to also keep being innovative.
Well, I love all of this talk about peer learning as a peer mentoring organization that resonates deeply. And I know many folks here will be at the DREAM conference next year. It's been fantastic in the past, and thank you for what you've done to facilitate that space in such an important time. I want to now shift to the time we're in for community and technical college leaders. The current landscape has indeed shifted, I think, quite dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years, but even today, there are sort of unprecedented challenges leaders are facing. What is the role of a community college or a technical college when facing the questioning of the value of higher education, historically high employment rates, but perhaps not the employment that everyone is desired as skill sets are changing and the demand of the workforce is changing so rapidly? What is the role of community colleges in that context?
So that's a great question. I think one of the things that we really, really try to stand tall in as community colleges is that we are the community's college. And so being able to understand who lives in your community, who has access in your community, and not just access to the college, but access to healthcare, access to the libraries, access to public support, access to mental health, right? Mental health support and services. And so really, really being grounded in the fact that the community college is meant to support the community. And knowing who's in your community, I think, is foundational. And so when we talk about access as an example, knowing who's not coming to college is as important as knowing who is coming to college, right? And what are the characteristics of those that aren't coming to college? Are they a particular racial or ethnic group? Are they multilingual? Are they on the outskirts and the transportation is what's keeping them from getting to you? Do they not have all of the resources they need in order to fill out the paperwork? Community colleges, while we're open admission, there's still paperwork that has to be filled out, right? Do they have the capacity to fill out that paperwork? And so when I think about the community college and what's foundational, it's representing and supporting the community. That said, community colleges, for a long time, we tried to be everything for everybody. And I think that's important because you want to represent every member of your community. But that becomes a capacity issue because your communities are very diverse in terms of who lives there and their challenges and their triumphs. And so then we have to think about, well, how do we strategically get to students who need us the most? Because there are folks in your community for whom the community college is the only option. And there are folks in your community that have other options, right? And so when I think about taking the community college to the community, what does that look like? And, we have some colleges in the network that have branch locations or outreach centers or community engagement centers and different types of opportunities to go out and find those members in their community and bring college to them. And I think that that is as fundamental today as it was yesterday. I think it's more important today than it was yesterday because we've got a society where there is a non-college going culture for different reasons, right? Some of that is people don't see the value of higher education. They don't know what the return on investment is. There are different ways to make money now that don't require the kind of financial and time commitment to getting a college education. And so we will always need to really reinforce our value proposition, but we also, as community colleges, really, really need to do everything we can to find those students for whom this is the opportunity to social and economic mobility, which is the promise that we're making to them.
This is such an interesting dichotomy or decision to be made when you talk about the importance of specializing as a campus, thinking about those for whom the community college is the only option or the best option, because there are so many spaces for learning and professional development. How do you do more with the limited resources? You focus on those who really need you. I love that framing for a challenging decision. And I think that flows into the next question, which is about the constraints community colleges are operating within. We know that community college leaders need to be especially resilient because you're often working with constrained resources, historical underfunding, sometimes inadequate staffing, and more than anything, that can lead to impact on student success for the learner. And so you talked one or two questions ago about the importance of sort of real examples and what coming to the Dream Conference or other spaces can provide. You know, how have you witnessed leaders overcoming those particular challenges of just under-resourced support when the mission is yet so important?
So that's a great question in terms of the resources that community colleges need to be successful. And we know that community college funding looks different than funding for four-year institutions. And we know that the amount of money per student at a community college tends to be less than the amount of money per student at a four-year institution. And so this idea of doing more with less is really part of being at a community college, notwithstanding that some community colleges are better resourced than other community colleges. It's similar, you know, across the country, depending upon what the social economics are of the community in which your college resides. But I do think that community colleges across the country are being innovative and creative. And so when I think about Broward Community College in Florida and their Broward Up program, they did a real deep dive into the zip codes in their community and got a deeper understanding of where folks lived who weren't coming to college and the extent to which being poverty impacted was threatening their ability to really come to college and to get involved with programs that would lead to degrees or credentials that could get them into the workforce. And so one of the things that they did with Broward Up is that they went out into those spaces and they brought that college to them, and they brought career readiness and other academic programs, as well as the wraparound support, so that they could really try to address these issues around intergenerational poverty and really help these communities with economic mobility. And so if I were to think about another example, Amarillo College's their culture of caring model, which is a national model, they too had a significant poverty impacted community. And what they really wanted to do with this culture of caring is to look at ways to support not just the student, but the student and their families. So that, and we know this, right? It's hard to learn if you're hungry. It's hard to learn if you don't have a place to live. It's hard to learn if your car is your only place that is yours, that is private, that is clean, that is safe. You have no other dwelling, right? And so they were involved in the deep culture work that's important on a campus to get everyone to understand that students can't learn if they're not safe, if they're not properly sheltered. And so what does it take as a college community to really think about the clothing, feeding, and shelter of your students in order to set them up to be successful so that they can take those opportunities in the workforce that are up by virtue of getting a credential or some type of certification. And so embracing the role of the community college as really needing to provide that holistic support, finding those folks in the community that need you the most. And then the last thing I would say is that partnership between employers and the college, because without those effective partnerships that are going to help community college students who, by and large are in their community because they value their community and they want to stay in their community, that means they need a job in their community that's going to provide living, sustaining wages. So those connecting points between employers and the community college play a real critical role in supporting the vibrancy of the local community as well as the community college. And an example of that is with Columbus State and their partnership with Intel that's really helping with the semiconductor collaboration network, and it's helping to build a pipeline of semiconductor technicians that will pay a living, sustaining wage in Columbus. So those are a few of the examples I would say that community colleges really need to focus on as we look at what's happening in society currently.
I love that you ended there because we're going to talk a little bit about the future of work and employer relations. And you highlighted how impactful deepening those relationships with employers can be. But this next question, I'd really love to frame not just about the relationships, but also the curriculum and the pace at which work is changing. Certainly the introduction of generative AI is increasingly on the minds of college presidents. And so when we think about, the 50 million some adult learners who are going to need education to transition in their career to fill more technical roles in the future, how does building those relationships with employers position a two-year institution to thrive and attract and retain and graduate more learners?
Thanks, Jackson. So I'm going to answer that first part about adult learners first, because that's the majority of community college students. The majority of our students are over the age of 24. And so when we think about partnering with adults so that they can get the credentialing and the education they need to either skill up or secure employment, it's really important that we see them as partners because they're in a place in life most of the time where they understand why they're in school, right? Unlike the story that I shared earlier, I went to college because that's what I knew I needed to do. I didn't have the ability at that time, 17, 18, to make the connection between college and work. But most of our adult learners, they understand that they're coming back to school because they need to make more money to take care of themselves and their family. So they've got that part of it. And so when we think about, well, what does that mean for us in terms of our strategies? I would say Achieving the Dream has been fortunate to kind of partner with Jobs for the Future, the Lumina Foundation, and others to really think about ways to ensure that we help our adult learners in their quest, right, to complete their education for the purposes of changing the trajectory of their families. And so one of the things that I would say about the Lumina project, which was prioritizing adult community college enrollment, we worked with a number of institutions to think about, well, what are some strategies that you can do to either increase access, increase retention, or increase completion for your adult learners? And so this initiative was really working with colleges to begin to think deeply about what is it that you want to do that's going to get your adult learners kind of over the finish line. And so one of the things that came out of this opportunity was a strategy hub, which is on the Achieving the Dream website, and it has a number of strategies for supporting adult learners. And so I would encourage you all to check out our strategy hub when you get a moment, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of our colleges really started thinking about using chatbot, and that gets to something you mentioned earlier, Jackson, in terms of the technology. using that to increase communication and outreach for adult learners. And what they were thinking about is adult learners who were in adult education classes, if they could promote kind of co-enrollment and degree and certificate programs, it would help with retention and completion. And so they use chatbot, they use their college relationship or customer relationship software so that they could really try to increase the retention and completion rate for adults who were taking some adult ed classes. The other thing that I would say is in terms of thinking about the future of work and what this means for adult learners in particular, is that gets back to that partnership conversation. And so one of the things that Achieving the Dream is doing with our community vibrancy workbook is really thinking about how do our colleges build more dynamic understanding of their communities and the local labor market, right? Because adult learners are looking for jobs. And so we need to be able to articulate really quickly in our outreach and our recruitment efforts that this is an opportunity for you to either upskill in a job that you currently have and make more money, or to get a better job and to be able to make more money and take care of your families. So we really think about understanding the local labor market, building new relationships with employers across industry sectors, and also developing better data to help forecast emerging labor needs and the skills and credentials needed for these positions. And that kind of gets to that second part of your question, which was around programming. And this is the tricky part, and we're all, educators here. Being able to foster some agility with programming on campus is culture work. It is hard culture work because programs have to shift to reflect the needs of the labor market, especially when you're talking about adult learners, because their goals are very clear. It really is around, earning enough of a salary and a living wage so they can take care of themselves and their families. And so one of the things that, we talk about with our colleges when we coach them in that 3-year experience is, how do you create a culture of caring, but also a culture of agility and innovation? Because it is going to be fundamentally important that you have the ability to make some adaptations to your program so they can support your labor market needs. And also the skills that employers are telling you in these partnerships that they need your graduates to have in order to be employable and to be able to really progress and be promoted.
Incredibly helpful perspective. And I want to shift a little bit now to sort of the team behind the student success and how leaders today can cultivate a workplace environment that drives innovation. And I ask this question mainly because of the historically high turnover higher education has experienced in the last 3 years or so. You have been a chief academic officer yourself, and like me, I'm sure you saw that we're only as effective as the teams behind us as leaders. So maybe some of your own leadership principles, but also any advice for the leaders on the call today for building that environment of productivity where folks thrive and deliver on the mission.
So I love this question because I think about my first job. I taught English for 18 years at the community college full time. And the first job that I had, it was retire high, hire low. And so the job position description, the advertisement said you had to have 3 years or less teaching experience. So it was perfect because I taught that one job at Nova. And so I was your girl. But what came with that were tremendous mentors, right? They knew that they were hiring people who, fresh out of grad school, they might have had the content, but pedagogy probably a little light, and teaching experience definitely less than 3 years. And so one of the things that I learned about campus leadership really early on was through mentoring. I had 2 amazing mentors that one was really helping me to think about how I positioned myself in the classroom as somebody who was 24, teaching other 24-year-olds, right? The other was really helping me to understand pedagogy and how to navigate a campus, right? Really how to understand all of these committee meetings and these decisions and accreditation and all of these things. And so when I think about, leadership coming full circle, I always try to remember that there are people on every campus and in every place that is just as green as I was. And then people who've been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years that still needed a refresher, right? And so when we think about leadership, creating leadership opportunities at all levels. And so starting out as a faculty member and being a course coordinator and then a department chair and then a dean and seeing a path where I could progress. But I progressed because I was curious and because people cared, right? If I weren't curious and people didn't care, I probably wouldn't be where I am now because I love teaching. But there were people that said, have you ever thought about, being an associate dean? You might be good at it, or have you thought about being, a provost or a college president? And so when I think about leadership in general, besides being curious and caring, I think with higher education, it's really important to understand not only your student population, but your employee population, and both really need a sense of belonging. If you don't see yourself at that institution, it's tough. It's tough to give all that you need to give if you don't see yourself as belonging. So sense of belonging is really important. I also think about opportunities for growth and advancement, right? The same that our students want to be stimulated and challenged, so do our employees. So creating pathways for them for growth and development. And I know that some colleges are resource strapped, so they don't have as many professional development resources or professional learning resources, but creating opportunities for professional learning is really important for your employees at all levels. One of the things that we do at Achieving the Dream is we work with senior leadership teams on setting their strategic vision, their strategic plans, setting their strategic goals, their key performance indicators, and what are their accountability measures, right? And that's something that your strategic teams they're used to, right? They need support, but they're used to that. But then when we work with mid-level leaders, your department chairs and your deans and your directors, we really talk about, well, do you understand the strategic direction? And it's okay if the answer to that is no, right? So how do we help you unpack the strategic direction and see your department as part of the strategic landscape that's going to get your students to where we all want them to be, right? So working with mid-level leaders as well. And then also when there's opportunities to work with those that are really new on campus, helping them to find their path so that they feel that they're really connected and that they see themselves staying and growing. Because to your point, turnover is expensive. It's expensive for the institution. It's expensive for the students, right? We all like continuity and some form of predictability. And so part of what we do at Achieving the Dream with our network colleges is really support them in leadership development. But I would also say that we do something similar for our students with our Dream Scholars program, which those of you that are attending Achieving the Dream, or if you've ever been, you've seen our Dream Scholars. And it's a national experiential learning program where our colleges nominate scholars from their institution, and we have a competitive process. We select the scholars, we bring them to Dream for the week, and they have opportunities to engage with our president and CEO, our board, other scholars, other colleges. We keep them engaged throughout the year. Sometimes they contribute to articles. They have opportunities to speak before other audiences, but it's an opportunity for those students to develop their leadership skills. And many of those students stick with us. And I actually just bumped into one at ACCT who is now a member of the board of trustees. He was a student trustee, but now he's a full-grown adult with a job and is on the board of trustees of his institution. And so that leadership development, it's as important for our students as it is for our employees.
That's such an important way to frame professional development and the responsibility of leaders in higher education. I want to ask one last question, which is really an opportunity for you to summarize some of the points you've made, and then we do have one or two Q&A questions that have come in. But the last question is really about the future. If you were to predict, what actions, presidents, provosts, leaders on campuses might make now that will lead to success 5-10 years into the future. What are some of those things that we can be doing now to set up our campuses for the future?
This is a great question. So I'll reiterate some things that I've said, and then I'll add a few more dimensions. Rethinking access, I think, is critical for the reasons that I shared. Just because your doors are open does not mean folks are walking through. You have to really hold their hands and make sure that they are fully integrated into your campus community if you expect them to be successful and to provide the support. I would say building internal and external partnerships to support students is critical. Our students, they have needs that are immeasurable sometimes. And so we want to do everything we can to support them. And so partnerships with the United Way or the Boys and Girls Club or the local food bank, right? In order to make sure that you can provide that wraparound support. When I visit campuses on coaching opportunities, mental health comes up more often than not. Our students are struggling mentally, and we need to be able to provide those resources for them so that they do have a place to go when they're in crisis. Many of them lead trauma-informed lives every single day. And so those internal and external partnerships for the wraparound support, but also for the planning for the future. So those partnerships with workforce development entities and industry partners and your K through 12 system to really think about that continuum of getting students through their educational journeys and into the workforce. And I would say really thinking about that ongoing relationship between credentialing and work and making sure that your programs lead to living, sustaining wage jobs is critical. And it kind of gets back to what I mentioned earlier about that agility when it comes to program design. And the last thing that I would add, which is something that I didn't touch on earlier, is it's really important for community colleges to be innovative. And that's tough because higher education historically moves pretty slowly. We're methodical, we're educators, we like to research and we like to understand, right? But we do need to be innovative. And we also need to think about who our students are and what they have access to. And so I was just at Complete College America, and there were questions about AI and how we view AI and how we're using it on campus. And some of our Achieving the Dream teaching and learning teams and our data and analytics teams have had different webinars and conversations. But one of the things that was said by one of the panelists is that we can't be afraid of the technology, and we cannot enforce edicts that say don't use, don't try, don't explore, because it's counterintuitive, right? And so this idea of being innovative and leaning into technology and thinking about ways that it can increase efficiency and spur creativity and a desire for learning are really important as we continue to serve the students in our communities.
Oh, thank you for a webinar focused on innovation. I think that's a great final formal response to give. And I want to give space now just to one of the questions that came in from an attendee. And you may have touched on this in a couple of ways, but the question is, what are some of the best evidence-based practices for closing equity gaps in community colleges? You talked about the strategy hub a little bit, so maybe we want to direct folks there, but what are some of the practices you might highlight from members or even your time as a provost at a community college?
Yeah, I love that question about closing equity gaps. So first thing that I would say is understanding what an equity gap is. Not everyone does, right? You really have to understand what an equity gap is. And that means you have to mine your data, right? So you have to look at the way different student groups are accessing or performing, or their indicators for success are different, right? And so the first thing I would say is understanding what an equity gap is. Once you understand what an equity gap is, thinking through, well, what are the structures, policies, or practices that are contributing to the equity gap? Because they don't come out of the air, right? There's a structure, a practice, or a policy that is fertile breeding ground for that equity gap, and you have to find it. And then have conversations around the equity gap and the students that are being disenfranchised, harmed, penalized due to this equity gap. And again, that's culture work, right? And so really being able to use the data to find what the equity gap is, understanding what the consequences of the equity gap are for the particular student populations, being willing to name whether or not that equity gap is a byproduct of something like systemic racism or historical policies that have made it easier for the institution versus easier for the students, right? There are different dimensions to what might be causing an equity gap, depending upon what it is in the student group that's being disenfranchised. And then setting forth, trying to eradicate it, trying to change it, right? And so if I think about an equity gap, and I don't associate it with any type of student, right? So let's say you can only access the vending machines on campus if you have some kind of a pay card, debit card or something like that. Well, there are some students who only operate in cash. For whatever reasons, they don't operate with credit cards. And so that's an equity gap for them when it comes to how are they able to access food on campus if the only way that they can do it is with a credit card and they don't use credit, right? They only operate with cash. If I think about another issue that might be related to an equity issue or an underlying equity issue, when I think about students who are recommended for behavioral intervention, do you see any patterns with the type of students that are being recommended for a bit? Do you see any patterns in students who are getting the highest sanctions for some kind of infringement on student code of conduct, right? Do we see any patterns in particular disciplines with student success rates? And that could be a pattern based on whether they have Pell or don't, whether they're male or female, veteran or non-veteran, whether or not they're Latino. There's all kinds of ways to look at the data, but really thinking through what that equity gap is. And the resource that I would recommend is Achieving the Dreams Equity Toolkit, which is based on 8 pillars. And for each of those pillars, there's a series of questions and some strategies that you can really work through to look at what type of equity gap you have and the best ways to move through it. I would say the most important aspect of equity work is being able to have the kinds of conversations that equity-minded leaders need to have. If you see something that's an injustice, you have to speak on it. If you don't speak on it, you won't address it. And don't make assumptions that people are intentionally trying to harm students. That's rarely the case, right? Sometimes things are in place for a long time and they are causing harm to students that you may or may not have realized, and you may have not really been able to have the kinds of meaningful conversations so that you could eradicate whatever that equity injustice is.
Well, I mean, one observation I would make is how important it is to find the cause of the inequity. I love that you started there in the data. The solution has to meet the problem. I guess a follow-up question from me, I think equity work is some of the most challenging as a leader, because sometimes you're pointing to a program or an underlying systemic issue that is maybe closely tied to somebody or some department. And our reaction innately as humans is to become defensive. How do you break down that defensive, natural human reaction and start to move forward in doing the work?
So a lot of this has to do with understanding. It's a misperception that having targeted supports for particular types of students is a problem, right? You can have a minority male initiative on your campus because you've decided that you want to deepen the supports for minority males for whatever reason. It could be minority males in STEM. It could be minority males in general. You can have targeted support for student parents because you have identified this population as needing additional support. And so I think the first part of, not hurting feelings and stepping into dangerous territory is getting folks to understand that equity means providing the support that students need. Not all students need the same support. And so just really understanding that it is okay to provide targeted support for Hispanic students, right? It is okay. And once you get into that understanding that targeted support for students is appropriate, because that's what we mean by equity, giving all students what they need, it's a little bit easier to then say, why is it that we need to provide targeted support for student parents or for minority males or for Hispanics in general, right? What are the contributing factors, right? And being honest in those conversations about the contributing factors, but being honest with the kind of professional learning and support that you need as practitioners to not have microaggressions or air biases or stereotypes and things that cause for further harm and trauma. So something that's really foundational to being an equity-minded practitioner is ensuring that you get the kind of professional learning and support that you need. People don't intend or want to microaggress their colleagues. It happens out of not knowing. And so that professional learning for practitioners is very, very important to the work.
Well, Dr. Trent, we're getting up to our time here, so I'm going to wrap us up by thanking you so much for your insight, your perspective, bringing your personal story to this group today. The title of this event is Inspiring Leaders to Adopt Transformative Strategies, and I know that I feel inspired leaving the conversation today. I hope others do as well. So please join me in just virtually appreciating Dr. Trent. Thank you for your time, and we will make sure to have this recording up online in the days ahead. So please keep an eye out if you'd like to share this with a colleague. And we also hope to see you at Achieving the Dream events in the future. So Monica, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for being here, everyone.